It was a crisp Monday morning when Emma walked into the office, her worn-out shoes tapping lightly against the marble floors. Her face, though tired, held a quiet determination. Her clothes, a little out of style and faded from overuse, didn't seem to match the polished environment around her. The building was a tall, glass tower filled with successful, sharply dressed professionals who never seemed to worry about anything. They had everything: money, status, confidence. Emma, on the other hand, had always felt like an outsider in that world. She was just a secretary, doing her best to make it through another day. Her desk was tucked in a corner, barely noticed by anyone except her boss, Mr. Thompson. He was the kind of boss who would pass by and give her a quick, dismissive glance, always focusing on the higher-ups. His eyes never lingered on her for long. But today was different. As Emma sat at her desk, organizing files and making her usual rounds of calls, she felt a strange tension in the air. The office was buzzing with the arrival of a new client, one of the biggest contracts the company had ever seen. Everyone was on edge, preparing for an important presentation later in the day. Everyone except Emma. As she was answering the phone, she caught sight of Mr. Thompson standing in front of her desk, a frown crossing his face. "Emma," he said, his voice cold. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Her heart skipped a beat. She had always tried to stay invisible in the office, but she knew when he called her out like this, it was never a good sign. Emma stood up slowly, her palms suddenly sweating. Mr. Thompson didn't wait for her to follow him. He turned and walked toward his office, expecting her to trail behind. When she stepped into the room, she could feel the weight of his gaze on her, as if he was sizing her up in a way that made her uncomfortable. His office was sleek and modern, with polished wood and expensive art pieces hanging on the walls. He gestured for her to sit, and Emma obeyed. "I've been meaning to talk to you, Emma," Mr. Thompson started, his voice firm. "I've been watching you for a while now, and frankly, I'm a little concerned about your appearance." Emma's stomach churned, but she stayed silent, unsure of what to say. She had never been one to stand out, and she never wanted to, but the way he looked at her now made her feel small, insignificant. "You don't seem to fit the professional image we're trying to project," he continued. "Your clothes, they're outdated. You look like you've given up, Emma. I've had enough complaints from clients about your lack of polish." The words stung, and Emma felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She had always struggled with her appearance, but she had never expected this, especially from someone who only saw her as an employee, not a person. I'm sorry," she muttered, looking down at her lap. "I'll try to do better." But Mr. Thompson wasn't listening. He stood up abruptly, walking around his desk. His tone became more severe as he spoke. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice growing colder. "This is a business, Emma, a place where image matters. And if you can't get that together, I'm afraid there's no place for you here anymore." Emma's heart dropped to her stomach. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was he really firing her for the way she looked? For something she had no control over? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She could barely breathe, her chest tight with panic. "You're dismissed," Mr. Thompson said sharply, as if the conversation had already ended. Emma stood up quickly, her head spinning. She didn't know what to say or do, so she simply turned and walked out of his office, her feet dragging as if they were made of lead. She felt numb, as if the floor had been ripped out from under her. She hadn't even been given a chance to explain. As she passed by the other employees, she noticed their glances. Some of them curious, others judgmental. They had probably heard the conversation. They knew why she was being let go, and it didn't make things any easier. Emma had always felt like she didn't belong in that world, and now it seemed that the feeling was mutual. But what they didn't know was that Emma wasn't just any secretary. She wasn't just the woman who looked like she didn't care about how she dressed. Emma had a secret, one that no one in that office would ever expect. After being dismissed from Mr. Thompson's office, Emma left the building without saying a word to anyone. The chill of the autumn air hit her face as she stepped outside, but it did little to shake the numbness that had settled in her bones. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had been fired. Fired because of her appearance, because of her clothes. It wasn't just about the job. It was everything Emma had worked for, everything she had sacrificed. She had spent years trying to prove herself, fighting for a seat at the table. And now, it had all come crashing down because of something so trivial. Her steps were slow as she walked down the sidewalk, her mind racing. She could feel the tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had to hold it together. She couldn't break down now, not when there was so much at stake. Emma had always been good at hiding things. She knew how to put on a smile, how to act like everything was fine even when it wasn't. But today, she couldn't pretend. The weight of the world felt too heavy on her shoulders. As she walked, she passed by a small cafe and stopped for a moment to gather her thoughts. She didn't know where to go, what to do. But she couldn't go home, not yet. She needed to be alone, to think. Sitting at a corner table, she took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she searched for the email she had been avoiding for weeks. She had received it months ago, but had always pushed it aside. It was an invitation to meet with a lawyer to discuss something important. She hadn't even told her closest friends about it. No one knew what she had been planning. As she opened the email, her heart pounded in her chest. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind. "We've traced your family's wealth back to several multi-million-dollar investments, and we believe you are the rightful heir to a significant fortune." Emma had always known there was something more to her family's history, something she had never been told. She had grown up in foster care, never knowing her biological parents. Her adoptive family had been loving, but they never talked about her past. It was only recently that Emma had started to uncover bits and pieces, and what she had found had been shocking. Her family wasn't just a regular middle-class family. They were wealthy, incredibly wealthy. And Emma, the woman who had been struggling to make ends meet, was the heir to that fortune. It was a truth she had barely been able to accept. She had always thought of herself as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in the world of luxury and power. She had never wanted to be a part of it. But now it seemed that the very thing she had been avoiding was coming for her, whether she was ready for it or not. Emma looked up from her phone, staring out the window. She could still feel the sting of Mr. Thompson's words, the way he had dismissed her without a second thought. He had no idea who she really was. He had no idea that the woman he had just fired was not just a secretary, not just some poor girl who couldn't afford a new outfit. She was the future owner of a vast fortune, someone who could change everything with just a single phone call. Her mind raced with possibilities. She could walk away from it all, leave behind the world that had never understood her. Or she could embrace the truth and use her power to change things, to make sure that no one would ever again be dismissed based on their appearance or their background. As she sat in the cafe, lost in thought, a sense of clarity began to wash over her. She knew what she had to do. She wouldn't let Mr. Thompson or anyone else dictate her future. She would prove them all wrong. And the first step? Going back to the office. She wasn't finished yet. The decision to return to the office wasn't an easy one, but Emma knew it was the right choice. She had left her phone on the table in the cafe, a sign of her resolve. She wasn't just going to call in and resign like she'd originally thought. No, she had something bigger in mind. As she walked back to the office building, her mind replayed everything that had happened earlier. The way Mr. Thompson had looked at her, like she was nothing. The sting of his words still burned in her chest. But now, it wasn't just anger that fueled her steps. It was something deeper. It was a quiet determination. She walked past the revolving door, noticing how different everything looked. To her, it seemed even more imposing, as though the building itself was judging her. But she wasn't intimidated anymore. She had a secret now, one that could change everything. Emma made her way to the elevator, her shoes clicking against the floor, and pressed the button for the top floor. She knew that the moment she stepped out of the elevator, all eyes would be on her. And that's exactly what she wanted. She wasn't going to slink into the background and let this moment define her. She was going to take control of it. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Emma stepped out, her breath steady. The usual buzz of the office was there, but it seemed quieter now, as though the atmosphere had shifted. She could feel people's eyes on her, but she didn't look at them. She knew what they were thinking, probably wondering why she was back. Emma made her way toward the HR department. As she approached, she saw Mr. Thompson talking to one of the executives, a serious expression on his face. He didn't notice her at first, but when he did, his eyes widened and his jaw tightened. He obviously hadn't expected her to return. Emma. His voice was cold, his tone far less casual than before. She didn't speak right away, instead taking a slow, deliberate step forward. The hallway had fallen silent, and Emma could feel the tension building. The few employees nearby were watching, their curiosity evident. She wasn't just another secretary anymore. Not today. "I need to speak with you, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice calm but firm. He hesitated, his expression flickering for a moment, before he nodded curtly and walked toward her. They stood in the middle of the hallway, away from the prying eyes of the other staff. And Emma could see how uneasy he had become. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice sounding slightly nervous. He probably assumed she was here to beg for her job back. Emma took a breath, gathering her thoughts. She wasn't here to beg. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to take control. "I'm not here to argue about my firing," she began, her words steady and clear. "But I think it's only fair that you know the truth." Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "What are you talking about?" Emma looked around briefly, making sure no one else was in earshot. She didn't want to get into the details yet, not with all the eyes around. She would reveal everything in due time, but now wasn't the right moment. "I've been hiding something from you, Mr. Thompson," she said slowly, watching his reaction. "Something that would change everything you think you know about me." He frowned, clearly growing more uncomfortable. "What do you mean by that?" Emma could feel the eyes of the staff starting to gather again. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure, refusing to let the pressure get to her. "I'm not just some poor secretary who doesn't care about her job," she said, her voice now a little louder, making sure everyone in the vicinity could hear. "I don't just work here because I have to. I've worked here because I chose to. But that doesn't mean I don't have something more to offer." She paused, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. The murmurs around her had started to grow louder, and Emma could sense the confusion and curiosity of her colleagues. They were all listening now. "Mr. Thompson," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "I'm the rightful heir to a multi-million-dollar fortune. My family isn't just some middle-class household. My family is one of the wealthiest in the country, and I've inherited it all." The silence in the hallway was almost deafening. The employees were frozen, unsure of how to react. Mr. Thompson's face had drained of color, and for the first time, he looked completely unsteady. "You?" He couldn't finish his sentence. His mouth opened and closed as though trying to process what she had just said. "Yes," Emma replied calmly, meeting his gaze. "I've been doing everything in my power to keep this quiet, to live a life where I wasn't defined by my wealth or my background. But I've had enough. I'm done pretending." There was a long pause before Mr. Thompson spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "So you came here today, too?" "Let you know that I'm done with this," Emma said firmly, her eyes narrowing. "I'm done with being dismissed because of how I look. I'm done with being judged for things I have no control over. And I'm done with people like you thinking that you can treat me however you want." For a moment, it seemed like Mr. Thompson didn't know what to say. He just stared at her, his expression one of shock and disbelief. Emma could feel the weight of the moment. The truth was out now, and she wasn't going to back down. She had nothing to prove to anyone. She was going to change the way people saw her, and the way they saw others. The silence that followed Emma's revelation was almost suffocating. She could feel the tension in the air, the disbelief of the people around her. It was as if the very fabric of the office had shifted. No one had expected this, certainly not Mr. Thompson, who was still frozen in place, trying to process her words. Emma stood her ground, her heart pounding, but her expression unwavering. She had never imagined it would feel like this. There was no grand moment of triumph, no feeling of victory. There was only the reality of what she had just revealed and the uncertain future that now lay ahead. Finally, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, but his voice wavered when he spoke. I had no idea," he murmured, his face a mask of guilt and confusion. I didn't realize. Emma cut him off, her tone sharp. Of course you didn't. It's easy to assume things about people when you don't take the time to get to know them. She paused, letting her words sink in. It's easy to judge someone based on their appearance and ignore everything they bring to the table. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he looked around at the growing crowd of employees, all of whom were now staring at him with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. The shift in the office atmosphere was palpable. Mr. Thompson, Emma continued, her voice now calmer but still firm. You may have power here, but I'm not going to let you dictate my future. I've worked hard, not just for you, but for myself. And if you think this is a game, that you can dismiss people because they don't fit your idea of what success looks like, then you've got another thing coming. She wasn't finished yet. Emma had one more thing to say. I'm not asking for your approval, she said, locking eyes with him. But I am telling you this, you'll regret this decision. You'll regret it because you'll never know the kind of person I truly am. And in the end, it won't just be me you lose. With that, she turned and began to walk away. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway, but Emma didn't look back. She knew that the damage had been done. Mr. Thompson had already made his decision. But she had made hers too. As she passed by her colleagues, she noticed their expressions, some of them still unsure, others silently supporting her. The tension that had been in the air just moments before had shifted, and Emma couldn't help but feel a slight sense of satisfaction. She had taken control of the narrative, and there was no turning back now. She stepped into the elevator, the doors closing behind her with a soft whoosh. As the elevator descended, Emma's mind began to clear. Her future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was going to fight for it. She wasn't going to let anyone, especially not Mr. Thompson, define who she was. She had already proven more than enough. Once the elevator reached the ground floor, Emma walked out of the building and into the world outside. It was a crisp day, and the sun was beginning to set. The world felt different now, as if she had just stepped into a new chapter of her life. She wasn't just the woman who had been fired. She was someone with power, with a future ahead of her. And it was time for her to make her own decisions. As Emma walked away, she didn't know exactly what the next step would be, but she knew she was done playing by other people's rules. She wasn't going to hide who she was anymore. She was going to take control of her life and make sure that everyone around her understood that she wasn't to be underestimated. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story and felt the emotions and twists along the way. If you did, please don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps out the channel. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a new story, and leave a comment down below to share your thoughts or tell us which part of the story you liked the most. We'd love to hear from you. And if you think someone else would enjoy this story, don't hesitate to share it with your friends. Thanks again for your support. See you in the next one.